All right, welcome to Module 2, Part 2, where we continue our discussion of Hinduism. As you can see from your syllabus, first up in this video is Brahman and the many manifestations of Brahman. As I've mentioned before, Brahman is the ultimate spiritual essence of Hinduism. So in other words, there is one supreme entity, so to speak, that is manifested in many different ways. I'm trying to avoid using the term God because we have so many ideas regarding that term, and it's important that you realize Brahman is something that's totally different from the Judeo-Christian Islamic God. It's more or less seen as the sort of foundation, the starting point of all things, the only real thing that exists in the universe. Everything else is thought to be temporary. And so therefore you don't see any symbolic or iconic representations of Brahman, since Brahman is almost more of an idea than anything else, but it is real. So when people talk about Brahman, or they wish to conceptualize Brahman, they see Brahman in terms of one of the many divinities of Hinduism, either male or female, some of which we've come across already. At the top of the list would probably be the so-called Hindu Godhead, Brahma, the creator, Shiva, the destroyer in a constructive sense, and then Vishnu, the nurturer. So Brahma, B-R-A-H-M-A, Shiva, S-I-V-A, and Vishnu, V-I-S-H-N-U, the Godhead of Hinduism. All Hindu male deities have female consorts, which gives us quite an array of divinities, hundreds of them actually. All right, just a few words about some of the basic principles of Hinduism. We've already come across Tattvam Asi, that's first announced in the Upanishads. Tattvam Asi, you are that. In other words, your Atman is Brahman. Atman being the little piece of divinity that everyone has inside them. The goal is to ultimately have your Atman reunite with the Brahman, and then you will have attained liberation or moksha or nirvana. Often a sort of analogy that's used is of a lampshade that is covering a light bulb. Imagine the light bulb being your Atman and the lampshade being the human ego. If the lampshade is dirty and encrusted and dusty, well, the light doesn't shine forth radiantly. But once the lampshade is cleansed and purified, then the light shines forth in a very radiant fashion. And the analogy here is that the light bulb represents the Atman and the lampshade represents the human ego. So one of the goals of Hinduism is to vanquish the human ego. This thing that always wants and needs and desires, etc., needs to be vanquished so that the Atman can shine forth fully. There is a famous statue in Hinduism, Shiva Nataraj, S-I-V-A, Shiva, and then Nataraj represents dancing, so the dancing Shiva, N-A-T-A-R-A-J, the dancing Shiva, and it depicts Shiva with his foot firmly implanted on this imp type figure, this little humanoid being that represents the human ego. And so why is Shiva joyous? Why is Shiva dancing? Because the human ego is solidly underfoot. In other words, he has vanquished and totally controlled and dominated the human ego. So what we have there is a little teaching device. The notion that all is one and one is all is very important. And what that means simply is that the Brahman is the one true reality, and all things are part of the Brahman, and Brahman is part of all things, as represented in humans by the Atman, A-T-M-A-N. Karma and samsara and reincarnation, very, very important ideas. Of course, Hindus believe that when you die, you're reincarnated and you come back in a different form. And the form in which you return is going to be determined by your spiritual path and precisely where you're at and what you've done in your former life. It is said it is possible that a human being may return as an animal of some sort. In other words, they may regress spiritually, and in which case they will sort of move through the food chain in a kind of automatic way until they reach humans again, because only humans have the sort of consciousness that can make decisions. And the idea there is to elevate yourself spiritually through your many lives and eventually attain moksha, M-O-K-S-H-A, release or liberation, at which point in time you will attain nirvana, N-I-R-V-A-N-A. Nirvana, actually with a small n, in Sanskrit is the term to vanquish, like to extinguish a candle flame, to put out a candle flame. And that works really well here because when you put the uppercase N on the word, in other words, when you make it nirvana a proper noun, then the idea there is that the candle flame represents the human ego, and once you put it out, once you vanquish it, then you will attain nirvana. Okay, well, what about this path that the individual should follow in order to elevate themselves sufficiently so that they eventually attain nirvana? Well, you can sort of classify, or let's say describe, the spiritual paths an individual might follow in terms of 4 different paths. At the very bottom, in other words, the most rudimentary, the most superficial, the most immature path a person may follow has to do with what was referred to as a path of desire focusing on pleasure. So this would be a person who is hedonistic, materialistic, enjoys the material things of the world, all the pleasures of the world, and is really not making much progress in any other area. And up another notch from that is the path of desire that focuses on success. So here an individual totally dedicates themselves to the furthering of their career, either making lots of money or becoming a powerful ruler. But again, they set their sights on strictly sort of worldly, mundane goals. So once again, at the very bottom of the list here, there's the path of desire focusing on pleasure, and slightly elevated from that, the path of desire focusing on success. Next, if we move up a bit in spiritual maturity, we have the path of renunciation. The path of renunciation, and we first have the path of renunciation that focuses on duty and charity. Duty and charity. So here, a person has dedicated themselves to doing the honorable thing, doing their Hindu duty, doing their duty for their family, for their loved ones, and also charity, giving of themselves, giving of their time, giving of material goods and resources, and devoting yourself to helping others. And finally, the highest path of spiritual maturity involves total renunciation. Here the individual totally renounces themselves in an attempt to absolutely vanquish their ego. And here they will embark on a path of total fasting, renunciation, meditation, etc. So Hindus see a person's life in terms of levels of spiritual maturity. And the idea is to elevate yourself as you move through your different lives till eventually you reach the point where your ego is vanquished, moksha or liberation occurs, and you attain nirvana. Next, we move to the important sects of Hinduism, and there are 3 important sects of Hinduism. Two of them focus on two members of the Hindu Godhead. The largest sect of Hinduism is referred to as the Vaishnavites, V-A-I-S-H-N-A-V-I-T-E-S. And the Vaishnavites include about 75% of all Hindus. It's definitely the most popular, important sect, and it focuses on Vishnu, as you can probably tell from the term. So people who are primarily devotees of Vishnu are Vaishnavites. Next we have the Shaivites, S-A-I-V-I-T-E-S, and these are devotees of Shiva, as you can tell from the term. Approximately 20% of the world's Hindus are Shaivites. And then finally you have a small minority, about 5% of Hindus, who devote themselves to one of the many female divinities of Hinduism, Durga, Kali, and they're referred to as Saktas, S-A-K-T-A-S. So the three primary sects of Hinduism, the Vaishnavites, the Shaivites, and the Saktas. And then finally, just a few words about the caste system of India. There are four Varnas, V-A-R-N-A-S, four Varnas. The Brahmins, B-R-A-H-M-I-N-S, Brahmins. The Kshatriyas, K-S-H-A-T-R-I-Y-A-S, Kshatriyas. The Vaishyas, V-A-I-S-H-Y-A-S, Vaishyas. And then the Shudras, S-H-U-D-R-A. You have some materials there in front of you so you can see the spelling of these terms. And these are the four basic Varnas, and I've just given them to you in order of prestige. Brahmins would include teachers, priests, philosophers. Kshatriyas, this would be the sort of ruling class, the aristocrats, the warriors and nobles, and so forth. The Vaishyas would include people who work in trade and manufacturing. And then finally, the Shudra Varna would include people who work in servile types of occupations, butlers and waiters and maids and things of that nature. And each of these four Varnas is divided into many, many different castes, C-A-S-T-E-S, of which there are thousands. Many of them are occupation linked. Some are linked to ethnicity. People tend to marry within their caste, a practice called endogamy, marital endogamy. And a person is pretty much stuck in the caste into which they're born. The game plan is to eventually ascend to the Brahmin caste, the highest of the caste, spiritually. So one will theoretically work their way up through the different Varnas until they reach the top, the Brahmin Varna. One last note here, there is another class or grouping of people traditionally referred to as outcast or untouchables, and they were ranked so low that in fact they were not even considered to be part of the caste system, and they were thought to be polluted. Basically, traditionally it was assumed that a person is born into this very, very low group, the untouchables, for reasons that have to do with choices that they made in former lives. Clearly, so the traditional thinking went, they haven't elevated themselves enough to be part of the four higher Varnas. Today, the term untouchable is basically equivalent to a racial epithet. So the term Dalit is used, D-A-L-I-T, and there are laws have been passed in India that prohibit caste discrimination, but unfortunately in India there's still discrimination against Dalit, formerly called untouchables, and so it'll probably take a while for the greater society to catch up with the new laws.